Body count continues. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. The day you count on for terror is not over. Friday the 13th, Part 2, rated R.
Now showing. Check your newspapers for theaters and showtimes.
Hello, everyone, and thank you once again for listening to The Pod and the Pendulum, the podcast dedicated to covering every horror franchise, one movie and one episode at a time. I am your host, Mike Snoonian, and I'm once again joined by my host, Jerry Smith. Jerry, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to do this. Really excited about our guest as well.
I am too, man. I think the first we did in this series went really well, so I think this is when the series really picks up, so I really can't wait to hear how today comes out.
Oh,
so
definitely.
Jerry, who do we have with us today? Oops, sorry.
Sorry. Today we have Al White, the director of my favorite film of the year, Starfish. I would highly recommend every one of you listeners to go and watch that movie. It's a one-of-a-kind film. So we're definitely excited to have Al here. Al, how are you doing?
I am good, man. I'm just so excited to get to talk Jason again because it's been years since I got to do that. So thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. We're excited.
Absolutely excited. So Al, I'd like to know, whenever we have any guests on, what is it when everyone says yes, I definitely want in on this particular movie. What was it that brought you to the Friday the 13th franchise, and in particular Part 2, which we're going to be covering today?
So to be honest, I got into horror pretty late. I was 16 or 17. I saw Night of the Living Dead, and then I would go down. I lived by myself when I was 17, and I'd go down to a VHS store and just buy an entire franchise. And Friday the 13th was one of the first ones I bought. Halloween was the first one I bought, and then Friday the 13th was pretty soon after that. And to be honest, I hated it when I first watched it. The entire franchise. It was just so. It just seemed really stupid. It wasn't shot very beautifully. There was a certain elegance to the Halloween movies and an imagination to the Nightmare movies, and I really wasn't gelling with Friday originally. But then as I'd come back to it over the years, just to be clear, I still don't think the Friday the 13th franchise has a seminal movie like Halloween does or Nightmare does. But I love the character and the world so much, and I love that every single film is completely different from the one that comes before and the one that comes after. And that for me is when I'm watching a horror franchise, that's what I want, is a constant pick and mix of different flavors and different sort of visions for it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and 2 is just the one for me. I mean, we'll get into it, but 2 is the one where I don't like number 1 as much as most people do. I respect it. But I'm a big Jason as a character fan, and 2, again, it's not him in his full culmination of what he's going to become. But there's something about Steve Miner's direction in this, and the final goal in particular, that just really appeals for me. So it's a standout for me. It's probably my favorite in the franchise.
Well, it's the first film that, like you said, it's not Jason kind of how we would come to know him, but it's such a good introduction to Jason being the main antagonist for the series. There's still warts, they haven't quite realized what they wanted to do with the character, but it's such a good beginning, I think, to that part of the series.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing because obviously after the first movie, Jason was, this 8-year-old dead kid that popped up in a dream sequence at the end of the movie, and yet even though he's only on screen for maybe 10 seconds, it was so memorable. And one of the things that really made Friday the 13th stand out, that when they decided, like, okay, we want to make a sequel, that pretty much everyone aside from, Sean Cunningham and Tom Savini, everyone else was on board saying, like, yep, it's got to be Jason. Like, this is where the series is going to go from here.
And let's be clear, it's kind of like Evil Dead 2. Like, this is a sequel which makes absolutely no sense in the canon, and we can all try and like fit it in as much as you want, but no, they're just making it up in a way of like, well, this is what we think's best now for the series, and I'm fine with that,
Oh yeah.
I'm very much looking forward trying to like pound those like square pegs into a round hole today when we're trying to figure out exactly where Jason fits in the whole mythology here.
Yeah, me too. This one's going to be fun. I could already tell.
I mean, Cunningham hated the idea of Jason being the villain, and I think that the fact that that's where the franchise goes, like, really stuck in his craw for some reason, all the way to the point where, like, when he finally gets the rights to the series back for part 9, the first thing he tells Adam Marcus is like, okay, you got to get the hockey mask off this guy as soon as possible, and I want as little of Jason in here as possible. Like, he just, for whatever reason, could not stand that that's where the franchise went, which is really interesting.
That movie, especially Jason Goes to Hell, it just shows how much Sean Cunningham just hated Friday the 13th in general. I mean, there's no Jason other than the beginning and the very end. Like, I mean, we'll get to that when we get to that episode, but that is one of my most like detested sequels of all time.
And
like,
I kind of love it.
Do you?
For different reasons.
We're gonna fight.
I know we're gonna kickbox over this one. I was in your camp up until a rewatch recently, and I'm like, I'm completely wrong about this movie. But there's some things I can't defend. But we're here to talk about part 2.
Sure, because I could totally weigh in on that as well.
Wait, what? We'll definitely weigh in.
9, man, like 9's the fucking worst. Like, it's just, but this is the thing, it's fucking terrible. But then I came back to it. I was talking about this on a different show last week because we were talking about Evil Dead. When you see like the roots of some of the script elements from 9 came from this Evil Dead like idea, it's very weird when you watch it as an Evil Dead movie and you pretend that Bounty Hunter is actually played by Bruce Campbell, which would have been brilliant. It's actually an enjoyable Evil Dead movie, but watching it as a Jason movie, it's just garbage. Like, it's absolute garbage.
It's the worst.
And I think I could see where if like Friday the 13th is one of their favorite franchises, where you would get that, like, where there's almost zero Jason in it until, like you said, the first 5 minutes and the last maybe 10 minutes of the movie. But I just think the special effects in it are so good overall, and it's really fun. I love everybody that works in the diner. It's just so goofy that it ended up working. Yeah. But again, we're here today to talk about part 2 and Sackhead Jason, which won our poll with like 60-something% of the vote for like the best version of Jason. Like, actually, Sackhead Jason was what people really loved. So
that's surprising.
Interesting.
Yeah, usually people go for the Kane Hodder Jason. Or my favorite's always Ted White. But there was a big reception for Sackhead. I guess there's just a lot of fans of The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
Yeah. Roy was in the lead for quite a while at first too, which I thought was really interesting.
See, I find that unique though, because my entire life I have been defending Part 5, and everyone hated Roy growing up, and now it seems like the tide, shifted.
Yeah.
It's almost like us genre fans can be quite contrary at times.
Yes.
Oh, definitely.
Well, it feels like Part 5 is going to get its Halloween 3 moment in the next couple years.
Yeah.
For some strange reason. Which, I don't know. When we get to that movie, that should be a pretty interesting discussion overall. Yeah. And I think I'll need to have like a long hot shower and like a loofah to kind of scrub off after watching that again. So with part 2, obviously the first movie makes like $60 million on a budget of, I don't know, whatever, like they could find between the couch cushions of 10 different homes. It's like a $500,000 budget, and it makes an insane amount of money. So they obviously decide, like, we need to get another one in the theaters as soon as humanly possible. Cunningham decides he doesn't want to direct again. Like, rather than rip off horror movies, he's like, I would rather make, rip offs of family movies. So he decides he's going to part ways with the franchise for over a decade, or close to a decade at this point. Tom Savini also thought the idea of Jason as the killer was really stupid. So he's like, I do not want to come back for this movie. And he had already signed on to work on The Burning as well as The Prowler, where he would meet Joseph Zito and they would come back for part 4 together, which is really interesting. But Savini basically goes on to do standout work in both of those movies. I think 2 phenomenal slashers and the start of hot Jason Alexander in The Burning. If you ever watched Seinfeld and were if you ever found a little pants tent for George Costanza, this is where it's coming from when you see him in The Burning. He's
what? So, just a little side note. You know what is the craziest thing about The Burning? And I love that movie with a passion. But when Scream Factory released that Blu-ray a few years back, the quality of the upgrade was so good that I had seen The Burning so many times. And there's that scene where they're on the raft. And for some reason, the quality was so good that I just saw Fisher Stevens' balls just hang out. I can't revisit The Burning without having this flashbacks of Fisher Stevens' nuts.
There's a nut sack right there. Fantastic.
What's bewildering to me is that Tom Savini was that adamant about not liking where they're going with Jason. So it's no, I'm going to do this other movie where they're literally just ripping off future Jason. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, but good for him, he knew what he wanted to do, and he came back and he did standout work in part 4. But yeah, Jason was the boy that got no love from anybody. Didn't get love from his creator. Didn't get any love from the camp counselors that let him drown. The only person that seemed to love and insist him was our old pal Phil Scuderi, the theater chain owner and financier, quote unquote, from Boston, who insisted that Jason be brought back as the main villain. And Scuderi brings back his buddy Ron Kurz to write part 2. Kurz had kind of done a little rewrite of part 1 after Victor Miller, added in some more comedic scenes. Though I think if you read the Crystal Lake Memories books, Kurz basically says Scuderi would call him on the phone and say, this is what has to go in the movie. And he would just kind of dictate and adapt whatever Scuderi told him on the phone and just kind of bring it to the page at that point, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, it's interesting that the first few movies in the series kind of had that, as far as the Scuderi, being that involved, kind of calling the shots from behind the scenes. I always found that pretty interesting.
Yeah. Could you imagine this happening now? This gradual evolution where it's not till halfway through part 3 where they really recognize what the character be and what the formula should be. If you imagine that now with a big horror franchise coming out where they're just we're just going to figure it out as we go along. It's so wonderful to me that was an era where you could do that and things could grow flesh.
Yeah, they allowed the series to grow back then, where these days, and I'm not dissing any of the newer franchises throughout the years, because I think they all have their place, but the Saw films or things like that, where they're thinking of 3 movies in advance when they're making the current one. It's very meticulous these days, instead of how it was with Friday the 13th, where it feels they were figuring out as they went along, and it kind of has its own unique charm, I think, because of that.
Which I think is an inherent problem with some modern franchises, is that they're going, okay, we now have this idea of what can happen with the franchise and how a character can become so massively iconic and make so much money that we want to do that from ground zero. And that can leave a bad taste, I feel, in fans' mouths, because they know you're trying so hard. You're just trying to force feed us something and make us fall in love with something. Whereas back in the 80s, they didn't have much money. They could take chances on stuff. They didn't realize yet how much money that formula could eventually make. So it was kind of we could fall in love with it while the creators were falling in love with it as well.
Yeah, it felt especially these first few movies, each movie was approached like it was going to be the last one. Yeah. They didn't really have a plan for another one in place. So they just kind of said, well, we're just going to make this. And then once the box office receipts came in, it was well, I guess we have to do another one because they're too cheap to make and too profitable to not do another one.
Well, that and the difference between then and now is like these days, every press release I get for a slasher film, it's automatically billing its antagonist as like the new slasher icon. Every film that comes out these days tries to make, even the one-off films, tries to make the antagonist like this huge iconic character. Whereas I feel like the Friday the 13th films didn't start doing that till later in the series, and I think a lot of the slasher franchises in their kind of origins, the genesis of the series, they didn't make those bold claims because they let the film speak for themselves. That's how Jason became iconic. People are returning time and time again to support these films, not like going right out the gate saying, "Oh, this is going to be huge."
No, I think that's the same with. I know we mentioned Saw, but I think the first one with Saw, they absolutely didn't realize how big that was going to become. I feel it's from part 2 where they get that particular structure moving forward. And I feel that it's just something that's, even at my ridiculously low level, I've had meetings with people where they literally say that it's like, we want a new iconic, slasher character or something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, everybody does, but I feel it's an organic process. It's by accident and magic. It's not something that you can kind of force into creation.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Saw. There was the Fangoria convention I went to right ahead of Saw 2 coming out, and both Wannell and James Wan were there to talk about Saw 2, and they were very upfront. They're like, look, they just basically gave us producer credits and paid us a pile of money, but we had really little to do with Saw 2. Like, we had no plans for this continuing after the first movie. We're grateful they want our input and whatnot, but really, like, it's out of our hands at this point. Like, they were very upfront about saying that, like, after the first movie, like, like, that's all it was supposed to be.
Yeah, and I do think that's a better way. I think one of the best examples for how it doesn't work is if you look at, and I know the 90s is a bad word for people, but if you look at the 90s and you have someone like Kevin Williamson producing with Jim Gillespie, who directed, I Know What You Did Last Summer, the Venom movie, which they thought was going to be a franchise. And they were like, yeah, we'll make this first one to set him up. And then the second one's where it really gets serious. And it just fucking fell apart because the obnoxious kind of balls of them to go, no, we're going to create a franchise now.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Well, I think that approach might work for like films like the MCU films, because they kind of have that set audience and people care about adventure after adventure. But I think in this day and age, every series and every film kind of aspires to do what Marvel's doing. Like, especially horror franchises, they want to set up these big, broad tells, and it's sometimes you gotta, like, I'd hate to use the phrase "pay your dues," but I mean, you gotta work towards it. You can't just come right again and expect something that big.
And it's why Sorry, Al, you first.
No, I was just saying, I think you're absolutely right, but I think it's splitting the audience. I think the problem is you got like the public audience, which are reactionary in an entirely different way, and then you got the genre fans. And the genre fans, yeah, I think you have to earn their love. You can't just buy it, essentially.
But I think it's too why you see every young adult franchise, any young adult book with more than, say, 2 entries in a series is getting snapped up. Any long-running comic book or anything that has more than one storyline that can be adapted is getting snapped up at this point because, and Hollywood just has his eye towards, like, if we can make 3 movies at a minimum out of it, we can, rake in the bucks at this point. And it's not whether or not, hey, is this a good story, but it's like, can we just, like, throw it out there and will an audience find it?
And I'm a part of the problem because I put money into this stuff because I do love a universe, I love the MCU. I love what they're trying to do with the Conjuring universe. I don't think it's working all the time and they didn't think it through properly, but I fucking love that stuff. So yeah, I'm definitely part of the problem.
I mean, it's what Universal wanted to do with the quote-unquote dark universe that got scrapped after like 2 movies. They literally wanted to turn like Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Mummy into the Avengers for monsters, and it was not good. Not good. No.
Well, thankfully that they're kind of like washing the slate clean and starting over. I mean, Lee Winnell doing the Invisible Man, I think is a perfect idea, and just from like the synopsis they released for the film, like it's such a unique approach as opposed to like this idea that they had with the whole proposed Dark Universe thing. Like I think Blumhouse kind of kickstarting the Universal revival thing, I think is really good.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. And I know they still want to get rights to the bigger franchises from the 80s like they did with Halloween. In my dream world, they would get, your Freddy Krueger, your Jason Voorhees, and a Chucky and do a revival of the Monster Squad using all 80s icons. That would be my ideal movie. And
Oh, that'd be great.
let like Joe Lynch direct that and just like let the money pour in at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean, and let's be clear, if it wasn't for licensing, just crazy licensing issues, 100%, like that's what everyone, I feel, Blumhouse included, want to do. It's like, let's get all these icons, bring them back. Like he's talked for ages, even about 90s ones. He wants to redo Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream. Just get all these icons and put them all in one universe.
Yeah.
I am there.
So where is horror at? One of the things I like to do when we kind of look at these movies is look at where horror is at the year the movie we're covering comes out. So Friday the 13th Part 2 comes out in 1981, just less than a year after the release of the first movie. And when you look at 1981, it could get a strong nod towards being the best year in horror of the 80s, if not one of the best of all time. So
Well, I think so. I think so because I was born that year, so naturally it has to be the best year around.
And I am older than you, so it was not in 1975 was not exactly a banner year for horror. But so to celebrate the birth of Jerry, we have just slashers alone: Halloween 2, My Bloody Valentine, Happy Birthday to Me, which still has one of the best posters of all time.
Definitely.
And The Burning and The Prowler.
Let's not forget Student Bodies as well.
Oh, Lord.
I've never seen Student Bodies.
Serious?
I've never seen it.
Watch that tonight.
Is that on Shudder?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
Okay, I need to find it then.
Dude, what's if you need to get a copy of that movie.
Okay.
What's amazing about that film is that it came out that year. Like, I just find that I came to that very late, and my mind was boggled that they were basically doing such a great deconstruction of. I mean, you can hate the movie and a lot of it is trash, but there's some really funny bits in it. But the fact that it was that astutely deconstructing slasher films by 1981 is crazy.
It was very much, in my opinion, it's very much the Scream of the early 80s.
Yeah, absolutely.
That I definitely need to hunt this movie down later on tonight. It's one of those movies you're aware of, but have never thought to track down. But 81...
werewolves too, right?
What's that?
So it was the year of the werewolves too, right?
You have 3 werewolf movies. You have Wolfen, which I've never seen. You have Joe Dante's The Howling. And my all-time favorite movie An American Werewolf in London. By my all-time favorite director. Oh, my goodness.
I'm a fan of all 3 of those.
Yeah, I've never seen Wolfen. I think I saw The Howling first, and that movie terrified the shit out of me. They used to show that on like local television all the time, and that movie just scared the bejesus out of me. But An American Werewolf in London, I think half the reason I'm married to a British woman is Nurse Jenny's accent in that movie. It's like, it's half the reason I married a Brit.
What I love about all 3 of those is you have 3 werewolf movies coming out the same year, and all of them are such good examples of how you could tell a similar kind of subgenre filled story, but in completely different approaches. I mean, The Howling is very much like that dirty New York feeling,
Yes.
Like it's grimy, and I love it for that.
It's the maniac of werewolf movies.
Very much so. And American Werewolf in London is very glossy and kind of has that John Landis feel, minus somebody getting murdered. And Wolfen Wolfen has like just such a really out there, unique perspective to it. Like, I mean, there's like the point of view of the wolf, or it's kind of more of a dog-ish kind of thing. But you have the point of view shots that feel almost like Predator, and like, you see the Predator's point of view and that kind of stuff. Like, Wolfen's very unique. It's up there with one of my favorite movies of its kind.
So again, it's a title I need to add to my must-see collection at this point, because I've never watched it.
And I think they're very, very. I think the werewolf genre is the hardest to do in horror, and I think it's the most underserviced in horror. And yeah, that year has arguably the 3, best ones. Really, I mean, that's kind of
that. werewolf films have always been very hit or miss for me, and they usually fall, unfortunately, in the miss section. But every once in a while, you get like these three movies, or something like Neil Marshall's Dog Soldiers, which, oh my god, I think that's probably my favorite werewolf movie of all time. I mean, when they get it right, or Late Phases, God, that movie was great. But when they get it right, werewolf movies can be really good. But I mean, for the most part, it just seems like they try to kind of ape off of what's done previously.
Right.
I think my problem is normally like they either fall like, yeah, for instance, Dog Soldiers, and I'm not popular for this opinion because I love The Descent, is one of my favorite horror films ever. But the Dog Soldiers, I love how the dogs look. Like I love how the werewolves look. I think that's fantastic, and I like the simple setup of it. I don't know if it's just me being racist, but there's something about the characters in it that drive me crazy. I can't stand my own people in horror movies a lot of the time. And yeah, for me, but then with something like Late Phases, like the characters worked well for me in that, but then the werewolves didn't, So I normally find I get one side right and not the other side for me.
I gotta go back and rewatch Dog Soldiers. It's probably been a good, I think I watched that right after I watched The Descent, and I remember really enjoying it. And I think it's kind of like a siege movie, if I remember correctly, right? They're all kind of pinned down, and
it's basically Night of the Living Dead, but with werewolves and
okay.
Very much so.
Definite rewatch then. 81 is giving us the Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead movie. Still one of the scary. And I love when we think of the Evil Dead, we think of one-liners, but the first Evil Dead just wants to scare the bejesus out of you. Yeah. But you're also getting Scanners and Dead and Buried. And the opening of Dead and Buried gave me nightmares for years after I saw it. I remember that was on HBO when I was a kid, and I just saw that opening sequence of, the photographer trying to hit on this really beautiful woman, and things are going really well, and then he gets tricked and burned alive, basically. And I remember seeing that, not being able to watch the rest of the movie, and getting bad dreams for so long after the fact. That movie's absolutely terrifying. I love that movie. So it's just a crazy good year for horror, and in the middle of that, now we have basically our first real Jason movie.
I do want to say you're remiss for mentioning James Cameron's directorial debut was that year
Piranha?
as well. Yeah, Piranha 2, The Spawning.
What's funny is I saw Piranha 2 growing up before I saw the first one. So when I think of the Piranha movies, that's Spawning is kind of the first one that always comes to mind, other than, Alexander Aja's films.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay, so here is our chance to try to make sense of Jason.
I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason. His body was never recovered from the lake after he drowned. And if you listen to the old-timers in town, they'll tell you he's still out there. Some sort of demented creature. Surviving in the wilderness. Full grown by now. Stalking. Stealing what he needs. Living off wild animals and vegetation. Some folks claim they've even seen him. Right in this area. The girl who survived that night at Camp Blood, that Friday the 13th, she claims she saw him. She disappeared 2 months later. Vanished. Blood was everywhere. No one knows what happened to her. Legend has it that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night, and that he took his revenge. A revenge that he'll continue to seek if anyone ever enters his wilderness again.
So, yeah, I've got nothing, because he really shouldn't exist.
Okay. Here are my thoughts on the thing. I love Friday the 13th Part 2 with a passion. I'm very much in the belief that that's where that's where the series really kicks off. But I have such a hard time figuring out that opening because the roles haven't been established in Part 2 yet. We don't get those till later on. Jason typically stays around Crystal Lake, that kind of stuff. But in the second one, did he take a taxi to where Alice lived? How did he
yes, yeah.
And how did he pay? Did the driver have any moral quandaries about picking up this dude with a sack on his head that maybe had a knife or something. Like I that opening, I watched it again recently with my wife, and I scratch my head every single time I see the beginning of that movie, because there's fan theories saying, oh, it's Elias, it's Jason's dad. There's all these different theories, but I just can't grasp a single one of them.
Do they clarify geographically where she is?
They never do.
I don't think so, but I would think that she moved pretty far away from Crystal Lake at that point.
I would not think that she's staying near Crystal Lake after everything went down. Because it wasn't like she was from there. Because in part 1, I remember Steve says to Alice, well, if you don't like it here, you can leave, give us a week. And if you don't like it, go back to New York at that point. So I didn't take it that she was from anywhere near Crystal Lake.
Yeah, so the idea of Jason just taking a cab.
And he's carrying his mother's severed head, which even if you put it in a satchel, it's still going to be pretty stinky.
So does this take place, because obviously the film's a year later, does this take place a year later, or is this, because they mention it, don't they, when they're doing the campfire kind of story later?
Well, yeah, they talk about it. It skips ahead, I think, from the opening scene to the campfire stuff in the beginning of 2. I think it skips ahead a few years in between that.
I think it's like 5 years. Yeah, I think it's 5 years from the opening sequence to when they try to open the camp down from Crystal Lake.
Okay, but so this opening sequence could be any sort of, we're not sure like how far ahead it is from the ending of the first film. Because I feel like Jason's definitely a walker. So all I'm saying is if he had a good month, he could hike down to New York and do some
How did he hunt down where Alice lived? Like, this is pre-Google. Like, is she in the white pages? Like, I don't quite...
He's like the shark in Jaws. He's just got like a prenatal way of like a sonar.
Following somebody to the Bahamas, like in the fourth.
Exactly.
I mean, I think we're just supposed to accept the fact that, like, maybe Jason didn't die in part 1, but the mother, for whatever reason, thought he was dead, and she was just, a wackadoo, that even though he was right there this whole time, she kept saying, he's dead, and, now he's like this girl.
I understand that, but at the same then Jason would have had to find his mom's head. There was a crime scene at the end of the first one, so then did they just never recover her head and Jason did? So does that mean Jason was watching the events of the whole first film of his mom killing people? Like, what was he doing?
That's definitely what they're trying to say, yeah. Because like he died in 1956 when he was like 8 to 10 years old or whatever. And then the first one's 24 years after that. So he would have been in his mid-30s, and he was just apparently watching everything happen without interfering. And then snuck in to steal his mom's head and got out.
What's funny is by that form of thinking, like, he was in his mid-30s. So by 2009's film, like, he's older than what Michael Myers was in the new Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jason's pushing 70?
He would
2009's not canon, though, is it?
Well, it's a whole new movie, I think. I think it just does away with all the others at that point.
Well, the screenwriters have recently said that they wrote it as a sequel, but and it's like I can't really get on board with that.
Dig in their own graves, like just don't say that.
I think that's what everyone does with the series. Unfortunately, they have their own ideas of the continuity and the timeline.
But this is the thing; it makes absolutely no sense. But I fucking love this opening.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
It's great, and I guess Alice, was supposed to be a bigger part of the movie, but whether it was money or Adrienne King has said that she had a stalker around this time and had kind of started to rethink whether she wanted to do movies at all. Like, she is only in it for this phenomenal opening sequence.
Well, I can understand, to be honest, I can understand why she would have a stalker at that time. I mean, when, like we mentioned on the previous episode, when the first movie came out, Siskel pretty much spoiled it, gave the address to what's her name?
Betsy Palmer.
Yeah, gave Betsy Palmer's home address away. Like this was a time where there wasn't that kind of shield from, the public when it comes to people that are, obviously Tom Cruise and people of that stature, they're protected. But like these little horror actors, I mean, Danielle Harris had a stalker for years as well. Seems like this genre is the one that attracts, obviously,
crazy people,
some interesting people.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
I mean,
there's loving, there's like loving the people in these movies and then sifting through their garbage cans, trying to find if they've discarded any, lean cuisines and dirty underwear, which some people tend to do.
oh, like lean cuisines. Wow.
And yeah, not Hungry Man, specifically lean cuisines.
No, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And, even growing up, I had the understanding that, hey, if someone survives one of these movies, they probably won't make it through the next one. I got that. But to this day, it bums me out every single time that Alice I mean, you go through a whole journey with the character, this whole arc of a character in a film, and then, she just gets an ice pick in her temple in the first 10 minutes.
But what I love about it is like they do keep her character feels like her character, which I think is great, and that's what makes it more impactful. Like coming off of something like thinking of someone like was it Rachel from Halloween 4 when so she's this great character in that, and then you see her at the beginning of Halloween 5 and she's a completely different character. She's just playing a bimbo in the opening sequence before they dispatch her,
Right.
So it's really, I think that's why it works in this. Is like Steve Miner's stealing a lot more from Halloween here. Like even like the kid's feet walking into Jason and stuff. Like it's a lot more elegant storytelling, I find, in the first film. And then the character feels the same, so you do feel that loss when she goes, which I really think is great.
And it's a great reveal, too, because you have the jump scare with the cat, and you think, all right, things are going to be okay now. And then as soon as she opens that refrigerator and there's Pamela Voorhees' head, it's such a fucked up, creepy moment. Like, not only is Jason going to kill her, but he's letting her know exactly why she's getting killed right in the moment before she gets the ice pick through the temple.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's setting up his victim in a way that maybe he doesn't do as much in the later films. I mean, it's almost like pranking her in the way that Michael Myers does a lot in Halloween films. Like Michael Myers really enjoys just fucking with people, whereas Jason in the later films, I mean, you come into contact with him, he's just going to chop your head off.
Right.
Yeah. He's always playing that. He's always playing that line, I feel, between is he a Michael Myers or is he more of a Leatherface? And in this, he's definitely more of a Michael Myers, which for me, I personally prefer. Plus, we learn in this an important fact, which is that he's very polite and takes the kettle off of the stove, which I think is nice.
I love that moment. Yep. Thank you for mentioning that, because I love that moment where he's like, you just think before he heads back on the Greyhound bus, he's going to have a spot of tea.
Well, he doesn't want to mess things up for the owner of the house,
Yeah, it's not their fault.
He's probably renting it. He doesn't want to do damage, So he'll kill its resident, but he'll take the teapot off so it won't burn down.
Do you think the cat makes it out alive?
Yeah, I don't see. That's the thing. I think eating animals is more of Michael Myers' deal. I mean, Jason just.
Yeah, I think Jason would do it if he's hunting to eat to live, but he's not gonna he's not just gonna kill something for the hell of it.
You mean if he doesn't have his bow and arrow like the 2009? Exactly. I think Jason's more of like a campfire, roasting hot dogs kind of person. Because if he takes a taxi to New York, he's obviously going to go to the Whole Foods and buy some good stuff.
Get some s'mores.
Yeah.
And he has his own, he's also very environmentally conscious. He can take off the sack he's wearing on his head, and he can put all his groceries in there. So he doesn't contribute any waste to plastic whatsoever. It's.
God, our listeners. Yeah. Our listeners already hate us on this episode.
They must. Oh, But yes,
go ahead.
You first.
No, I was just gonna say, getting back on track. Sorry, guys, it's been a week. Getting back on track. I mean, Jason shouldn't be who he is in the second one, based off the first one. But that's kind of where I always lean towards the idea that the end of the first one was more of a dream sequence. Mm-hmm. I don't think Jason was in that water. I think Jason was kind of, maybe cutting an apple in his little shack than the first one. And, because in the first one, I mean, he's basically that flashback of that drowned kid. He jumps out, and that's pretty much it. There's really no explanation of it other than that.
No, the ending of the first one I think is 100% a dream sequence. But if you really want to work hard and make it all, canon together, then it can be like her projecting the fact that he's still alive, but because she's been told the story of him as a kid, that's the only way she can imagine him,
See, I
think I'm on board with that, yeah.
I like that one.
So I think this is the only movie, too, where you get a little bit of empathy for Jason, too. Because when you think about what he's doing, like he's basically he's, for at least from the time that he kills Alice to 5 years later when the new campers come in, he's pretty much left to his own devices in that kind of homemade shack that he set up, living off the land. He's kind of just really a survivalist. And it's not until a whole new group of campers come in that he gets back to killing people. Even Alice's death, you can kind of justify it, because if he did see Alice kill his mother, like the one person in his wife that he loved, you can kind of get the reason why he would go after her. And, not that it justifies it, but you have a little bit of understanding of to why he killed her. And if Jason was just kind of left alone, none of this ever would have happened at that point. But as soon as someone kind of comes into what I would say he calls his territory, his kind of predatory instincts kick in at that point.
Well, I feel like that's where the series has always suffered, is when they move out of that kind of mindset. To me, the best Jason films are always the ones where Jason is kind of, quote unquote, like protecting his environment.
Mm-hmm.
And, Al mentioned that, Friday the 13th films always play kind of like walking this line of whether it's a Michael Myers or a Leatherface thing. And I think in 2, it's kind of a good combination of both. Mm-hmm. Because that first Texas Chainsaw film, I don't really consider Leatherface a villain. Like, no. He's just, these people are coming into his house. These people are coming into that thing. And yeah, obviously don't chainsaw people up and eat them for barbecue, because that's not cool. But in the second one, Jason only goes after those people because they're basically invading where he lives. And that's the only place he knows since childhood.
And the last time that a big group of people came into that area, his mother died. So he's probably a little bit afraid.
Oh, most definitely. And I just think it's really interesting. It's a really interesting story to follow, I think, in the second one. Because, we have an idea from the beginning that it's Jason. It doesn't quite say it, but, who else would it be, that would bring the mom's head? Unless it's like another surprise character that happens to pop up out of nowhere like the first one. But, it's interesting to follow the character in, like you said, that one kind of empathy-filled sequel. This is the one where it's 100% Jason going after the people for coming on his territory. It is in the future sequels too, but not as much as the second one, in my opinion.
Right.
And it's fun to get on board with that, because I also feel like not just Jason, but the film's protagonists are really great in the second film. Ginny is, I think, one of the best characters in the whole franchise.
Yes.
Yeah, I think she's one of the best Final Girls, period, to be honest. But I think why Jason works so well, and I think there are different roads to the same place. You have like the form of thinking where people think you need to be sympathetic, which I think Jason's the most sympathetic, iconic, villain in horror ever, really, other than if you're going back to like Frankenstein or some Frankenstein's monster or something like that. But yeah, there are people who like having that back history. So it's like Nightmare, we understand where he's from, we understand his rules, and the same with Jason for sure. And I like when you prescribe to that. And then there's a John Carpenter feeling before, obviously, they introduced Thorn and Sisters and all that shit. With Michael Myers is just a force of nature, and you're not meant to understand why they're doing what they're doing or why they're targeting you or anything like that, And I think there are two different roads that can still lead to an iconic character that essentially, Jason and Freddy and Michael Myers, they're comic book characters. That's what they eventually end up becoming, is these comic book characters, but in really violent comic book films, where you can root, in the best versions of these films, you can root for the protagonist, but you can also root for the villain. And with Freddy, that's always been a bit sticky for me, because his history is not that sympathetic, I feel.
Right.
Whereas Jason, it's 100% sympathetic. And that makes it so easy to root for either side. And in part 2, Jason is at a very sympathetic point, given this weird history that they're giving him. And then, introduce the characters like Ginny, who have, some sensibility about them. They're not just, like cartoon characters doing stupid things. I think it works really well.
Well, in the Friday the 13th series, especially, I think the later films, it's so hard to really care about any of the protagonist characters, because they're just very one-dimensional, and it's always kind of the Jason game. You want to see what Jason's going to do. But part 2 and part 4 especially, I feel like those are the two films in the entire series where you have the characters that just feel real and accurate. Part 4, I've always said, if you take Jason out of it, it'll be a really great coming of age film. And I think 2 kind of has that feeling as well. I mean, it also features a final girl that isn't your typical final girl. And I mean, I don't mean that in any disrespect towards any other characters, but I mean, Ginny's very, very smart. She's a psychology major. Like she uses manipulation and she uses psychology to one up Jason. Like you don't really see that very often. Later on, you're basically seeing people with telepathic powers, doing power lines against Jason. Like it's odd. But I mean, with Ginny, you have a very well written, well acted, just all around really good character, like a really good opponent for Jason.
And she feels like just like a real. I mean, I think a lot of these actors are close to being age appropriate, which is great. So they feel more vulnerable and more like they're actually teenagers heading into their early 20s. And Ginny, she's not a virginal character. She's definitely having sex. And she's definitely got already got a lot of experience with different parts of life, whether it is from trauma to sexuality to whatever. And I think that's something that they would increasingly push away from, which makes for less interesting characters.
And I think one of the many things that really works for Ginny is the fact that she's so multidimensional. She isn't a flat character. And I think in a lot of these films, when you come across, your main protagonist, they have to always be the badass. And I've always hated that. I want a character that will rise against, whatever adversity that they're facing in their antagonist, but also at the same time be someone that I could relate to, because I know everyone likes to play it tough, but I know that if Jason was coming after me and I was under the bed, I would probably piss my pants too.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
oh, that seems fantastic.
I think that that's one of the best scenes in any slasher film, because it shows that vulnerability, and it shows that this character who's using every single thing in her power, whether it's mentally or physically, to try to figure a way to survive. That's the moment where you can tell they're not okay by this. Like, they're really fighting tooth and nail. They know that killer's in the room with them, and that's the scariest spot ever. And she pees her pants, and like I saw it in the theater a long time ago, and it's like the audience was laughing, and it's just like I've never found that funny at all. In fact, that's pretty scary.
I would agree with that. Yeah,
there's honesty in that scene. There's a lot of honesty, and I think that makes the film so much more enjoyable than it already was.
Yeah, no, I think that scene's fantastic for her, and I think it's fantastically directed. My only problem with that scene is the extra 10% when Jason falls off a chair, which is funny for sure. But everything else around that is great.
I love clumsy Jason in parts. Like, he is not on top of his game, and that adds to the charm of the film. Because later on, Jason would just run through doors, and he'd throw Rob through the window in part 4. He's just a mean guy. This one, Jason's trying to outsmart someone, but he falls off a chair.
Oh, it's insane. And then the look on his face when she does. Sorry, we're jumping up, but the look on his face when she pulls a chainsaw on him is just hilarious.
Even his fighting when he's fighting Paul, it's so just scrappy and just all over the place that Jason's taking swings. It's like a brawl, with Jason Voorhees, and I think a lot of people forget that. Before he's hitting Julius's head off with one punch in Jason Manhattan, he was falling off chairs trying to full on have fisticuffs with Paul in part 2.
Yeah.
I feel like he was really influenced by Sugar Ray Leonard in part 2.
I think if somebody was going to write a slasher movie in 2019 and they wanted to know what do we need to do to develop characters, I would have them go back and actually watch the first 2 Friday the 13th movies. Not because they're the deepest characters in the world, not because they're the most fully developed, but because as an audience member, you grow to like them for their little quirks and their foibles, and they feel like real people before they're all killed off. And I think that what ends up happening somewhere along the way, I'm trying to think about part 7 for a moment, and I want to say it's the character of Melissa, who's the real bitchy character in that movie. somewhere along the way, writers started to write every character like they were Melissa, the character that you hated. Like, or if every character was James Spader's character in Pretty in Pink, and then put into a slasher movie, like you could not wait for that person to get killed. And that doesn't necessarily make for good storytelling, because I don't want to root for the villain when I watch these movies. I want people to escape, and I might like the villain, and I might enjoy watching them go to work, but I don't want them to be my rooting interest. I don't want to root for evil. I want to root for characters that I like. And in part one,
no, go ahead.
In part one and part two, I like these characters a lot, and they feel like, I would have been young back then, but they felt like the neighbors that I had, like the kids that babysat me. That's who these kids remind me of growing up.
Well, I want to be scared by the characters, and I love the whole series, and I love all that stuff, and I love, most horror franchises, which is why I was very excited to do the show. But unfortunately, what happens in a lot of them is you get to the point where the characters are just so bland that you find yourself rooting for the killers. And when you really stop and think about it, like, I don't want to root for a pedophile that was burned alive by parents. I don't want that. Growing up, I was enamored by Nightmare on Elm Street, but as, 38 years old with multiple kids, like, I kind of feel weird about the whole era where there was like a hotline, where there was a pull string Freddy, and I owned it. But, that's odd to me. I like the first few Friday the 13th movies because I'm still scared by the idea of Jason. You have these likable kids coming to his turf, and you know that he's coming after them, but you don't want them to die. I mean, two of my favorite deaths from the entire series is Rob's death in part 4, which I think is the most heartbreaking death in the entire series. I mean, he is killed in the basement, and he's screaming, "Oh, he's killing me, he's killing me." Like, it's sad to watch.
Right.
Or like the podcasters dying in the new Halloween. Those were the deaths that really bummed me out, because like that guy's basically watching his partner get murdered, and he can't do anything about it because he's dying too. Where part 2, Mark's death, the guy's in a wheelchair just trying to do his best, and man, he just got laid. And he comes
about
outside,
to get laid. He's about to.
About to. He goes outside, and bam, hatchet to the face. He falls down the stairs. You care about these characters. You don't want them to die. Whereas in the later films, I can't think of a single character in part 8 that I didn't want to die.
Right.
I wanted to hit that girl in the face with the guitar.
And what I love about Mark in this movie too is they never play Mark for pity. They never play Mark off like, oh, poor dude in a wheelchair. He's super strong, for one. He's very confident, and he's basically, from the moment that is it Vicky the one? Is Vicky the one that is the one who really wants him? Like, from the moment Vicky lays eyes on him, she's like, I need that D. Like, absolutely. Like, it's not a pity lay. She is throwing herself at him, and it's awesome. Like, I think if you made that now, it would be a pity thing.
The entire movie. Mark is like the essence of suave in that movie. And no, they don't play him. They don't play up, oh, it's the handicapped character. They play him like a normal character, because he is. You know what I mean? Like, I hate when films have to do that. And I feel like in some ways, as much as I just adore the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I mean, that first film I think is one of the most important films in history. I do feel like they do get kind of exploitative a little bit when they approach Franklin. But Mark, the fact that he's in a wheelchair, it never comes into play as far as a hindrance to the character. And I think that that's really good writing, and that's a really good direction by Steve Miner.
And I think what makes it really frustrating is, from my opinion, at least, to be clear, I'm not going to say like this is incredible writing. Like, Friday the 13th Part 2 does not have incredible writing or anything. But the fact that it's just that tiny, tiny change that makes it that much better. Like, it's just that understanding of, no, all these characters, like you say, Mark would normally be stereotyped in a way. Like, look at Scott, who were introduced at the beginning of the film by slingshotting a girl in hot pants butt, and then stepping out from the bushes with maybe the most ridiculous look on his face I've ever seen in my life. Like, it's insanely hilarious. And he would normally, in any film after this, he would be like, oh, he's the fucking asshole, because he's too handsome, and he's just like womanizing and like being a dick, and he'd be bullying people. And he's not. He's actually, like, you see him in that scene later when he's dancing with the dog. Like, you might still not like him for whatever reason, but he's not an asshole or anything, And it's just that tiny, tiny, tiny extra dialing of, no, all these characters have to be either relatable or likable or sympathetic. And it's such a simple thing that should be in every movie.
Yo, definitely. I agree with you 100%.
Right.
Like, there are those little quirks where the characters could have very well been those stereotypical, this is the jerk, this is, the slut, this is the pure one, this is all this stuff. I feel like Friday the 13th, like, they set those characters up to where you think that that's what's going to happen, but it never goes into that territory. It, like, every character has their flaws, has, their quirks in a positive way, and that makes them feel that much more realistic to me.
It does. No, that's, and I would, to your point about Mark. Mark would be the character in the 2009 remake who owns the cabin and is a dick the whole time in the movie, and they never give him a single likable moment in that movie, and therefore you can't wait for him to die. Where here, there's that bit of tension. And when he's hung upside down, there's that bit of tension. Like, ooh, is he going to get out of this at this point, or is he a goner? And you feel like you know the answer. He's going to be a goner, but you're kind of rooting for him to hold on just for a little bit longer. And I don't think you get that nowadays. One way this movie does kind of subvert slasher tropes is not every character in this movie ends up getting killed. It's a pretty large cast. You have about 16 campers altogether, and about half of them take off midway through the movie to go to
disappear.
Yeah, to go to the honky tonk dive bar in the middle of New Jersey or Connecticut or wherever. You get this like honky tonk bar, and they're like all their friends are getting killed, and they're like downing shots at the bar, which is kind of awesome.
Which people love to read messaging. Like, again, one of my favorite quotes is John Carpenter saying, "Oh, we never intended it to be if you were pure, then you would survive from Halloween." That wasn't something we were, coherently thinking up. People love to read into this stuff. The message of this movie then is, if you stay out with your friends getting fucked up, you're going to live to fight another day.
There you go. So if you ever want to survive a slasher movie, find your little honky-tonk dive bar and drink some Jägermeister till you can't walk.
I always had this idea that Stu Charno's character that goes drinking with them and stays there is still in that bar.
That should be the sequel they do. They just go back to that bar and they're all still there.
They do the Blumhouse Halloween thing, but it's just Stu Charno's character coming out of the bar like really old.
That was a long night.
Beautiful.
I would watch that.
Beautiful. So, Al, you had mentioned Steve Miner's direction a little bit earlier, and I would say that this movie is a big step above overall. Some of the sequences you get, like that opening set piece we talked about with the reveal of the head, Mark's death in the wheelchair, when he gets that machete to the face, and then you get that beautiful shot from behind of the wheelchair just clanging all the way down the stairwell. It's so mean, but it's such a great moment. Things like that just weren't part of the first movie. I love little touches like that here in Friday the 13th Part 2.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a... Sorry, man.
No, go ahead.
I'm a bit of a Steve Miner apologist, to be honest. Like, I'm not going to claim he's a great director or anything, but he just every now and then has enough interesting ideas, and I do think he has something to say. Not always, but it pokes through every now and then. Like, I'm
kind of Forever Young.
No, I'm My Father the Hero. I'm one of those rare. I enjoy bits of Lake Placid, and I'm one of the rare people who, I have to whisper it, who loves H2O. But like, he has a character in his voice, whether you like it or not. He at least is trying to say something. And there's a lot of slasher films where I feel the director doesn't have anything they're trying to say, other than to hopefully make a competent movie. Right. Whereas for better or worse, he has a voice, and he's using it here, I think, for the first time properly, and I really love it.
I think he has his own voice, but he also keeps the look of the first movie, which I think makes it a more cohesive story, which does make it better.
I think that Steve Miner's contribution to the second one is a huge one. I mean, I appreciate the first film, and I appreciate it more after the last episode we recorded, because Justin Beam really made me reevaluate that movie. Mm-hmm. But as far as the second one, it's the first Friday the 13th film that actually scares me still. Like, there's that scene where Ginny's in, the house or the cabin, and you see Jason run through that window. That is one of the scariest shots in any horror film of all time, as far as I'm concerned.
Because you know something that she doesn't know in that moment, and it makes it so much scarier because now you're waiting for that reveal.
I also feel like that was kind of the change between The Strangers and The Strangers Prey at Night for me. The first film, of Strangers, very much felt like a very terrifying film of what's out there coming for these people, but it's a matter of when it's going to happen, Whereas the second Strangers film, I mean, they kind of made those characters, those realistic characters, into kind of a Jason Voorhees thing, where like, oh, you get beat up, you get set on fire, everything else you're still ticking, and I feel like that's what happened to the Friday the 13th films as they went on. Especially with the zombie era Jason, which I mean I always get a lot of crap for because I don't really care for it that much. I think 6 is the last film that I actually love with a passion. But these first few ones, I mean, you kind of feel like Jason is a real person. You don't feel like he's like come back from the dead. He hasn't been struck by lightning. With maggots falling off of him. And that adds to the fear, that adds to the tension, and that adds to how terrifying I think that second film is.
But I would argue that I think he could, if Steve Miner had come in and directed, say, for instance, Part 7, which I completely hear what you're saying, and they're in very different eras of Jason. I do love the look of Jason in Part 7 a lot. Like I like that sort of skeletal form. But I feel if he had come in and directed something like that, I still think he would have brought that to a whole different place, because it's even like in the editing here, like just cutting from like the dog at Jason's feet, and then you cut to them roasting hot dogs, on the barbecue. There's again, it's stupid, but there's thought going into it, And a lot of the time with these movies, there isn't that kind of thought.
I feel like that even, and I won't get too far into it because we'll talk about it the next episode, but I even feel like that was kind of a mistake with the third film, is that it didn't have that meticulous planning, I think. Like, it was more concerned... Even Steve Miner's contribution to that, I think it was more concerned with, okay, we need the shot to be perfect to, really complement the 3D aspect. Right. Whereas the second film didn't really have any gimmicks that they were trying to, keep in mind. So I think Steve Miner just really went for broke as far as trying to give fans of the first film a film that maybe kind of gave the same feeling of the first film, but amped it up in basically any form.
And it's a great place to be in. Can you imagine, like, if you're a director, Friday the 13th has come out, it's made, tons of money, becoming a phenomenon pretty quick. But again, they don't know what it is yet. You're in an era where those expectations aren't necessarily on you. So, like, to be able to come into something like this and go, oh, we get to build from something, but also we can go our own way with it, Like, and you can really feel he's excited about that opportunity.
And I also think that, obviously, the first film's score is iconic, and I think everything that Manfredini did for the film just works. I'm not a big fan of like the Fred Mullen era as far as the soundtrack, but I also think that Manfredini is just at his best with the second one. Like, I listen to that soundtrack when I'm writing, like almost at least once or twice a week. I usually put on the disco theme of the third one just to make my kids laugh, but. Friday 13th, we were eating dinner last night. I cooked spaghetti, and my kids, it was kind of like a somber night just because it's been an interesting week for my family, but it was kind of gloomy. And then we were all just sitting at the dinner table eating spaghetti, and then under the table I put on the Friday 13th 3 theme just to lighten the mood, and it was impossible not to smile at that. Right. The second film, I mean, man, I nothing but great things to say about Manfredini's score. Like, it's so good, and it's so terrifying.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. What do we think of the Jason portrayal in this movie? Now, there's 2 people playing Jason throughout it. There was it Gillington? Well, I'm gonna butcher this right now. So Warrington Gillette was originally hired to play Jason, which I cannot think of a more waspy name for a person to play Jason Voorhees. Like, that is just... should not be, but he was hired. He told people he could do the stunts. He had some training, and by all understanding, like, after his first scene, he couldn't do it.
Yeah, he took all the credit for a lot of the stuff that Steve Dash ended up doing, and I think Steve Dash doesn't get enough recognition for his contributions to Friday the 13th Part 2. Because, I mean, the majority of the scenes with Jason is Steve Dash. Right. You have, Warrington Gillette busting through the window, and I think that's a very, very great shot in the second film. I mean, he does some things, but I think when it comes down to who played Jason in the second one, my opinion always goes to Steve Dash, and I think that Sackhead Jason, I think, It's so much fun to watch.
Hmm. I think a reason I love Sackhead Jason so much is you get that you only see that one eye through the hole in the sack, but it's a human eye in this one. And you see a lot of expression and a lot of emoting, and you can see the wheels turn. Like that scene in his shed at the end of the movie when Ginny is dressed like his mother and she's, trying to basically subdue him. You can see the wheels turning in his head. Like it's a really good performance overall, and you can, there's more going on there.
You what you see in Jason in the second film is fear. He's frightened by Ginny at the end. He's scared. He's reduced to that scared little boy who just wanted his mom. And that's something we don't really get to see very often in the series. I mean, even from the third one on, when the main protagonist in the third one basically says that Jason tried to rape her, which I have a huge problem with that scene. But I mean, Jason, even from the third one on, has a very calculative, kind of like angry thing to him, especially in the Kane Hodder era. I mean, Kane Hodder just wants to rip shit up, and he does.
Kane Hodder as Jason is basically every pissed off suburban dad that the kids won't get off his lawn or turn down their stereo.
Or Kane Hodder's Jason. As much as I love Kane, and dude, it's one of the nicest guys in just existence, in person. As much as I love that, Kane Hodder's Jason always reminded me of those bros that ride those lifted trucks, that drink Monster Energy drinks and, listen to Chevelle. Just everything.
I always thought on the flip side of that, I always felt like there's definitely a part of, as a genre fan myself, who was someone who was bullied a lot in school, like he was that's the embodiment of what you wanted to be and what you felt like you wanted to do when you were a teenager, which all those people who are bullying you, all those girls who are teasing you and mocking you and stuff, and he's just that terrible, unhealthy expression of that, just going through butchering them all.
I could see that. Whereas Steve Dash's portrayal of Jason, he's very much that kid that had to pretty much grow up by himself in that shack. He's angry and he's protecting his environment, but at the same time, he's scared because all that he wants is his mom. And that's like, I'll probably be the only person in existence that will compare Friday the 13th Part 2 to Hereditary. The many times,
Interesting comparison.
The many times that I saw Hereditary in the theater, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess, I found the audience kept laughing. Oh, I added a T to that. Kept laughing at the idea of the son crying when all this stuff got really intense in Hereditary.
Are you kidding me?
Funny.
No,
it was
crazy.
Where are the cinemas that you're seeing things in? What's happening?
Yeah, what theater is this? I never want to go to this theater.
The Central Valley of California is the worst. But yeah, these people were laughing, and it was just like, how can you laugh at that? This kid is bawling because all that he wants is his mom. And I think that that's like such a relatable thing. Like, as human beings, at some point growing up, this all we want is approval and protection from our parents. And I think that's where Pamela Voorhees in the character succeeds. She went about it obviously in a very unhealthy way, but the fact is she was just trying to protect her son and the memory, and she was angry. She just projected it on the wrong people. She should have projected it on herself.
Right.
Whereas the second one, Jason does the same thing too. He's hurting because he saw his mom killed, but he doesn't realize that his mom was the villain. And Jason is scared when Ginny basically one-ups him. I love seeing that side of Jason.
So for me, the biggest accolade really I can give to this film, it's similar to me with like Infinity War, which is a different comparison, I guess you wouldn't normally make with this movie. But Infinity War for me is on paper everything that I don't like about Marvel Comics. It's like I'm not interested in space, I'm not interested in seeing 64 characters. I like much more insular stories, much more relatable ground level stuff. But I just fucking love that movie because they pull it off so well. And with Friday the 13th Part 2, I'm kind of on the opposite side of you, Jerry. Like, as much as I like things always feel more grounded from slasher films, I do love the comic book side of it, and I do love when we get to, like, powerful zombie kind of Jason. Mm-hmm. But the films just aren't as good. The protagonists aren't as good. They're not as well made or constructed. And here, this film, again, I'm not going to say it's a masterpiece or anything, because I still don't think there's a seminal film in this franchise, but it's so much better put together than so many of the other films in this franchise that it's my favorite one, despite the fact, for me, that it's Baghead Jason. Like, I would love this to be the Jason that, it's more relatable to me as a character for the series.
I like the fact that the Friday the 13th series, they either succeed or fail on the entries that try to do something different.
Yeah.
Part two tried to do something very different than the first film, and it succeeds. Part 6 had a very tongue-in-cheek approach, and I think it succeeds. Whereas Jason Goes to Hell, and to a lot of people, Jason
That
X,
was different.
I think Jason X has a charm to it, and it's pretty fun, and it's silly as hell, but I still enjoy it. Whereas Jason Goes to Hell, it just doesn't feel like the film it doesn't feel like the franchise that we've been in love with for years. You know, it just doesn't. It lacks that.
Right.
Again, it's made by people who clearly don't want to make something that you're in love with already. They want to give you a middle finger, basically.
It's kind of the same feeling as I get, and I know there are people who defend it, but I'm sorry, I can't be one of those. It's basically summing Michael Myers up into 2 very awful explanations. 1, a senior citizen cult, and 2, Michael Myers kills his family because he's a pissed off long-haired Kiss fan that doesn't get to go trick-or-treating. Like, that isn't the character that I love, whereas, like, the later Jason films, it's like, I want to see different takes on it, but I don't want it to stray so far from the source material that it just doesn't feel like that's what I'm watching anymore.
I think sometimes there's this idea that as a creator or a director that you so have to put your own stamp on a character or on a movie to make it your own, that you lose sight of what makes the character work, and you lose sight of what makes the audience love that character, especially when you're 8 or 9 movies into a franchise like you were with Friday the 13th. It's like, no, I'm going to do something different because I know the material better than these people that come and spend their money every year on it, and I'll show them. And invariably, it always ends in failure at that point.
I think that's what I loved so much about David Gordon Green's Halloween film. It's like it's the 11th movie in the series, and there's an infinite amount of possibilities of where they could go in a bad way. And and I've read some of the scripts, and I've read some of the pitches for what could have been, and it's very different in a bad way. But I liked the new film because it was the 11th film in the series, yet it felt the closest to the first movie for me. Everyone tries to do their own spin, and I feel like the 2018 Halloween kind of did its own thing, at the same time being very faithful to what we loved about the original one. And
I feel like here we have a sequel which is definitely already doing its own thing. Like there are some tonal things here which are carrying on from the first one, but it's definitely like doing a bit of a U-turn into a new kind of dawn for this franchise.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, I think the franchise, in my opinion, starts with the second one.
Yeah.
I like the first film as its own kind of movie, but as far as the Friday the 13th that I'm in love with, it starts from 2. So I kind of hold the rest of the sequels to Friday the 13th Part 2 instead of the first one.
Makes sense.
I agree, but I'm just saying I know people who must prefer the first one over this one, and one of them lives in my house. And for them, they see this, like, I think it's just too subjective, It's like, for them, this is already that change in personality, and they wish that they had stuck with how it was originally.
Really? That's such an interesting opinion. Like, I'd really like to hear about that, because where could they have went with a sequel to the first one that would basically stayed with that?
I agree, but I think that's the inherent problem. Like with any horror sequel, I think it's almost insurmountable. Like it really is, because logic has to go out the window at some point.
Yeah.
And you're gonna be pissing off one of your group of of fans for whatever reason they attached to that original film. So I think it's so inherently difficult, and you do then have to get, again, like that's why I get asked a lot now what's my favorite franchise for horror, and I do go to Friday the 13th a lot, but with that caveat of I think it's kind of one of the worst, but I enjoy that each film does have that different flavor to it. Like I love that about this franchise.
I love whereas the continuity in the Texas Chainsaw films really drive me crazy. Like I love the first 3 movies of that series a lot, but I mean they're obviously very fractured as far as continuity. I see that as a hindrance to that series to me, whereas I kind of like the idea of every Friday the 13th movie feeling somewhat different and having, that different stamp. But I also feel like it's important to kind of play in the same sandbox, so to speak. You know what I mean?
No, I do.
Right.
I like for me, there are franchises that on the show I do, like we avoid certain franchises just because they have repeating, even directors, for instance. Like the Wrong Turn franchise could be so much fun if it wasn't for the fact that 4 of them are done by the same director.
Right.
I think it's 4.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously the second one's the best, but
Yeah.
Wrong Turn 2 is like one of what's weird is Wrong Turn 2 and Joyride 3 are 2 of my favorite horror films.
Joyride 3, man, I love Joyride 1 so much. I really do.
It's great, but 3 is just like batshit insane with the one-liners.
Yeah, and I love Wrong Turn 2 with Henry Rollins playing like a drill sergeant. It's so good.
Yeah, but look at that compared to the first Wrong Turn, where it's a fucking completely different movie. They're just geographically in a similar space.
They go from like psychological, with Wrong Turn, the first one, into like Joe Lynch making a full-on just splatter movie with the second one. It's interesting.
And Al, you had said like how there's no seminal movie in Friday the 13th, and you're right. And I think I used this comparison in the first episode is like it's like kind of going like Friday the 13th is like to me like going to In-N-Out Burger or Five Guys Burgers where I'm not getting the greatest cheeseburger in the world, but I'm getting a really good one, and it's going to be the same every single time. So I know that I'm always going to like it. Whereas you look at a series like Halloween, which I love, but the disparity in quality between, say, Halloween 1 and Resurrection, it's like they don't even exist in the same universe at that point.
It's like a caricature of what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, and I hear what you're saying, but I do also feel like we use this example when I had some friends who was getting into Friday 13th, and we had the fun of going from part 2 to part 6, and even just that jump is mind-blowing. Like, absolutely, like, what happened? Like, it's just insane.
Well, there's even, like, a huge tonal shift between 5 and 6. Like, it almost feels like it's a different series.
Right. Well, like 5 is porno, basically.
Yeah, it's very sleazy, like, something that you feel like William Lustig would have made in part 5.
Right.
And then you have 6 that is, like, in a lot of ways, this horror comedy. Like, it's a very funny movie. Whereas, like, if you watch part 2 and then you watch part 6, like, it's a head scratching jump.
But I mean more just the quality of the film, not so much the direction it heads in, but in terms of just watchability. Like Halloween Resurrection is unwatchable. Like no one
I've watched it twice in my life. I can't do it. Like I have the box set and I go through them all, but I always skip that one.
I've always skipped Resurrection.
But this is the beauty of the world, guys. Like when I was doing a festival tour last year, and I will not say people's names because they legitimately stopped talking to me after I kind of brought this up without naming them still publicly on something. But I met someone who very passionately Halloween Resurrection was their favorite Halloween movie.
Yeah, that person needs to get help. That person should call somebody. They're not well.
No, like I'm such a believer that art is subjective, and I love those takes. I love it because one of my favorite horror journalists, Anya Stanley, she will fight to the death about Halloween 6, and I can't stand that movie, but I love reading every single tweet or article that she writes on that because it's not about any irony. It's a genuine appreciation for that. So when I hear about someone that like will love like Halloween Resurrection or Jason Goes to Hell, I don't agree at all. But I will read and listen to every single take on that because it's so interesting to hear why that movie works for someone.
No, I think someone like Anya Stanley writes about Halloween 6 in a way that's really intelligent, and you can see the point of view, and it makes me go back and critically reevaluate that movie. But I just feel like if someone were to come to me and say like Halloween Resurrection is the best in the franchise, that would be the last person I would see before I die. Basically, that's how I would feel about that person.
Yeah.
Is Anya talking theatrical or producer's cut?
I think the producer's cut of Halloween 6 is the more watchable one just because of its absurdity. I mean, I still want to start a band called Paul Rudd and His Magical Runes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's the producer's cut is so weird that I could watch it and I don't appreciate it at all. But I could watch it and just be entertained, like, what am I watching? Whereas the theatrical of Halloween 6, I remember I watched it opening night, 1995, and I was just so confused by what I watched. Like, the reshot ending where Jason gets beat up with a pipe.
Yeah, no, it's maddening.
Fluids. It's that, and, like, it's such a slap to the face of how to give a proper send off to Dr. Loomis.
God,
Like you can tell by Halloween 6, like they hated Dr. Loomis.
Yeah.
Whereas he's even batshit insane in part 5, but like he was always my favorite character in the first movie.
This is my problem. I think I'm becoming a terrible person the older I get, because I've always enjoyed just subjectivity, and I think it's a very freeing thing when you're a creative as well, is because it means, you know, that we have enough people on the planet now. If you can find that demographic, they're going to like or hate whatever you've done, you know, which I think is kind of reassuring. However, I do feel, I increasingly feel that there's kind of two separate ways to divulge that stuff. One is objectivity, where I can look at a film objectively and go, I don't like this film personally, but I can see objectively it's incredibly well made, like the acting was great, blah, 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 you know, so I appreciate that. And then a film that I might love, but I can tell objectively isn't good. And so with something like Resurrection or Halloween 6 or something, it's one of those things where I would hope people could be like, look, objectively, these are bad. But subjectively, I really enjoy it for these reasons, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And I appreciate that stuff. But I haven't found anyone to date that really hates Friday the 13th Part 2. Because, I mean, I feel like it's such a solid sequel. And not even just a sequel, but it's just a solid film in general. Like you said, it's not, you know, game-changing. It's not like a, you know, cinematic classic. But it's also in a lot of ways, I think, an important film in the whole history of slasher films.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it winds so well. Like, I love like the pacing of it. I think you get like just enough time with the characters. You get like some interesting little directing decisions, which I really like just a few. But even like when the girl, I've forgotten her name, but the girl, who wants to have sex with Mark, and she's going to get ready, and she's like changing into her brown panties for some reason, which I don't really understand. And then runs to her car outside. The camera stays inside the hut and then like pans across from where she was inside to like through the window. And there's just these lovely little moments in it that just make you feel more like you're in the place, you know, which I really appreciate.
One of the moments that I wish was in the movie that's not is the extended death of Jeff and Sandra. I remember when I was researching this episode and reading about their death, it's one of the things that got caught by the MPAA, and part of it was just how horrific it was. And that when, you know, this is the death with a spear goes through both of them as they're having sex. And the way it's originally scripted and the way it was originally shot was Sandra sees Jason coming. And she's she's horrified. She gets this look of terror on her face, and she's trying to push Jeff off of her so she can get away, but she's not strong enough to do it. And they both get speared at that point. And it's one of those moments that I would love to have seen.
Oh, that sounds great.
That actually done, because it's that's a terror. I think that's one of the scarier things is when you see something coming, but there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Isn't that like the typical white American male issue? That, you know, if that sums it up. Sandra sees danger. She tries to get him off of her, but he's way too busy, focusing on his own wants and needs.
He's in the pound. He's going to Pound Town.
100%.
So,
like, Jesus.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot. And speaking of Sandra, I mean, that's one of my favorite things. And God, I hate always referencing part 4, because what am I going to have to say when part 4's episode comes up? But I love the fact that it's connected where Rob Dyer, the character that's kind of hunting Jason, that's Sandra's brother.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's very, like, the events of 2 very much play a huge part in 4. So, like, I also feel like 4 kind of helps flesh out the character of Sandra more than we even get in the second film. Mm-hmm. Like, it's interesting that. And it's also interesting, the death scene. I mean, it's very, you know, publicly been stated that it's pretty much lifting off of Twitch of the Death Nerve.
Yeah.
You know, that great Giallo film. I mean, there's a lot to pay attention to in the second film. Not just the characters or the deaths, but everything from the score to, like we said, Steve Miner's stuff. Even the stuff that you said was written, but it wasn't filmed. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's such a rich history, you know, as far as production, the film itself, and you know, its impact, that I feel like later in the series it doesn't quite hold that same kind of rich history as the second one.
Again,
would
it's like
agree.
you feel like everyone still cares and is trying really hard. I feel like everyone had something to prove. Like when you're saying the score earlier, I did mean to mention one of the things I love in it is that he's using the cello for Jason and then the violins for Jenny. So like whenever she stops moving, just the cello goes, and then as soon as she gets up again, like that split second, the violins will come in, and it's so subliminal in the movie, but it really just helps ramp up that tension throughout like the end finale. And it's just all these little moments, that people care about.
Well, everything from what you just said. I mean, Manfredini, when he approached the Friday the 13th series, he approached it in ways that I feel like weren't approached later on by, Fred Mullen and the other people involved. And no disrespect to them. But like you said, Manfredini used various instruments to kind of define the characters. I mean, how iconic is the thing that he came up with, and even that kind of tells the story.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a spoiler throughout the entire first movie.
It's such a great example of how important a good score is to a film, and a lot of times in horror films, especially these days, it's mostly people trying to like recreate, Carpenter's Halloween theme or something like that. They try to come up with their own take on that for their film. Whereas I feel like the Friday the 13th films, the music was important to the actual character development.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that it's just a perfect ingredient, and, like Al says, the films aren't, going to change the world. They're not like classic kind of stuff. But at the same time, like, I feel like there's so many ingredients in the Friday the 13th films that you kind of don't get in a lot of other series.
There is. I think there's a real effort. I think it's, again, they don't have a lot of money to make these movies, but they had a built-in audience for it, and everybody was just getting their start. Like, this is Steve Miner's first chance to direct a movie, so obviously he's going to do everything he can because he's going to want to get that next gig overall, and he does add to it overall. I had a few stray bits left before we wrap up. Do you guys have a few moments for that?
Yeah, I'm done.
Of course.
How do we feel about the final jump scare in this movie with Jason coming through the window? How does that compare to part one's?
I think it's better. No,
better.
I think it's better. Not just for me. I'm not saying, I don't speak for everyone else, but just in a nostalgic kind of sense. I saw the second film before I saw the first.
Same here.
There isn't a single moment in the entire series that scared the hell out of me as a kid as much as when Jason pops through that window in slow motion and grabs her. You get the close up on his face that you haven't seen that, before. It's very different than the look of Jason in the first film, yeah. But it's such a scary moment, and I don't know why it still freaks me out every time I watch it, because what's coming, but it's just the way it's shot, and with the combination of the way it's shot, with the design of Jason's look, with the score. I mean, I think it's just amazing. I love it.
I think it's like you said, it depends what order you come to these films in, because I think it's actually more organic in this one, the scare, but the problem is by this point you're expecting that scare, So I think I can understand it's not as iconic, it's not as effective, but I agree with you. Like, I prefer it. I wish the film ended right here at this second. I don't need that extra little bit afterwards. I think you should have that shock and get out again. But yeah, I love as well that because he takes his bag off earlier and you don't get to see his face. Right, and I love that frustration. And you think, oh, you're going to go out without seeing it, and I respect that. I kind of love that in horror films. I like never seeing the character's face, but at the end here, they just say, no, just take a good long slow motion look at it. It's fucking cool.
And I love the reveal of the face. I would say in each movie, one of the things I look forward to the most is the reveal of the makeup for Jason in each one. I think that's one of the things that I always look forward to more than anything else. And I wouldn't say that this scare is quite as effective as the one in part one. In parts, I don't think you have that really tense build up to it like you do where it almost goes on too long in the first one and you kind of feel like, all right, time to go. But I do think it's really well orchestrated. I love how it's done, and I do like that makeup look overall because it looks like a more, from where the character would go even in part 3 and part 4 before you even get to zombie Jason. This still looks a bit more human, just kind of like a mutant overall. But I think it's pretty great. Is Paul dead or is he alive? Is Paul dead or did he make it through?
I always I thought he's dead. I mean,
No.
I've kind of connected it. It's probably not his eye, but as a kid, I always thought it was his eye at the beginning of the third one. You know, that the crazy guy's holding up to the camera. You know, like he's nowhere to be found. You know, when they're wheeling her off. I mean, there's no explanation. So that and wasn't the original script, or I thought of it, is when they close up on Miss Voorhees' face. Didn't she blink in like one of the original drafts or something like that?
Yes, she was going to blink and smile. I think they even shot that too, but they decided it looked too goofy.
Well, I mean, it seems like it would have looked goofy, but I mean, I also feel like that, yeah, I also feel like maybe that would have been like a little wink to like, haha, you know, because she's asking him where Paul is, and then all of a sudden, you know, Miss Voorhees winks. So
it's a little too crypt keeper at that point.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, just one thing I did mean to touch on earlier, which is only a tiny thing, but like in that big scene we're talking about where he falls off a chair and she pees herself and all that fun stuff. I do think it's actually a really important part. I don't know if in slasher history, because Giallo had done this stuff before, but at least with American horror, like it's a point where we're with our protagonist the whole time, and then in that scene is where she's disappeared, and we're suddenly not aware of where our lead character is anymore. And instead we're following Jason as he's looking for her. And I feel that's the beginning of that baton getting passed over, you know, which from episode 3 and onwards is going to be increasingly, no, we're going to spend a lot of alone time with Jason. And that's the very first time it happens.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I agree.
So ultimately, what is Halloween 2? What is Friday the 13th? What is Friday the 13th Part 2's legacy? Because reason I said Halloween 2, I actually have it here in my notes, like Friday the 13th Part 1 and 2 actually affect Halloween 2's production. When Rick Rosenthal first directed Halloween 2, he very much wanted to do what John Carpenter did and create a much more suspenseful movie, and not something that would have been a slasher that we came to know in 1980 and 1981. And once the Friday the 13th movies in particular come out, Carpenter looks at the first cut of Halloween 2 and says, this isn't scary. Like, if we release this right now, it's going to be laughed out of theaters. And he actually goes back and he starts adding a lot more blood and a lot more gore to Halloween 2, which I think is kind of ironic because there's so little. Like, if Halloween came out now, if you just cut out the nudity, you have a PG-13 movie. Still pretty damn effective PG-13 movie, but you have not a very gory graphic movie. And now Carpenter felt like you needed that if you were going to be successful because of the Friday the 13th series.
And they really, like, the beginning of Halloween 2 is very close to the beginning of Friday the 13th Part 2. Like, they really get into a similar state of Michael walking around and following him from place to place. Which I also feel they then replicate again with like the beginning of Scream 3 with Cotton Weary's girlfriend. That's almost identical to Friday the 13th Part 2.
Right.
Now, I feel like the Friday the 13th series, as far as for American audiences, kind of helped kickstart that kind of era of very big Savini kind of effects. You know, they had done it in like Giallo films or a lot of, you know, European films in general prior to that. But as far as like the whole video nasty era, when it comes to America, I feel like we had the Friday the 13th films to kind of help steward us into that era. So I do feel like the Friday the 13th films are important in the sense that they helped pave the way to a lot of other films and franchises in general, in the way that Halloween kind of made it possible for Friday the 13th to exist. Friday the 13th made it possible for a lot of other future films to exist because of that.
That's, I would say 100%. Yeah, it's the success of these two movies that really let so many slasher movies, and you see so many set, like in campsites, for example. That's why you see so many of these come out in the 1980s. And Friday the Part 2, even though it wasn't as successful as the first one, on a budget of a little bit over $1 million, it still does $21 million, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but if we're looking at, that would have been $120 million now.
Well, it's kind of like what happened with the first Insidious. I mean, my numbers might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was like, what, $1.5 million movie? And didn't that make like $95 million?
It made a crazy amount of money.
It's insane. Like, people might not say that Friday the 13th 2, like, it wasn't as successful, but if you start out with $1.25 million and you make 21, that's just about 20 times your budget. Like,
you've done something right.
Well, this is the problem. I think everyone always looks at box office, and box office really doesn't matter. What matters is your return. And the return on investment is much more fascinating. And it's always horror films, by the way. When you look at return on investment lists, it's almost 100% horror films.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree. So
I feel like Friday the 13th 2 is one of the films in the series that has such a lasting impression. And I say that with all the love in the world for the rest of the films. But 2 is kind of, like I said at the beginning of this episode, 2, in my opinion, is where it kicks off, where it really starts. And we do have so many films in the series that do a good job. I mean, Part 4 is one of my 5 favorite films of all time in any genre, not just horror. Part 4 is just it for me. But 2, I think, is the most important film in the series. I really do.
Without Part 2, you're not going to get to Part 4. If Part 2 did not do well, if they didn't go in this direction, you wouldn't get to Part 4, let alone Part 9, 10, 11, 12.
Well, maybe you guys will answer this next week, but I'm always interested for people, because there is a jump anyway from 1 till 2 that, includes some logic out the window. How would you feel, like, disregarding how we might feel personally about Part 2, if Part 3 had been Part 2? If they had come straight in with a Jason, he gets his mask halfway through that next episode, do you think that would have changed much?
I don't think the series would have been as effective or successful, because I feel like that kind of that sequel, the Part 2, where it still had its warts and all. It wasn't perfect. Jason falls off of stuff. He was clumsy as fuck, but it's part of its charm. It was a good movie to get fans kind of latched onto this series in a way that the first one maybe didn't. Like, they gave us a character that we were really enthralled by. Me personally, I wouldn't have cared to see another movie about Mrs. Voorhees if she had lived. It just didn't do it for me. But Jason, after the second film, I could watch a dozen films about him, and we did.
Yeah, I think, Jerry, so Al, what you were saying is if, like, Part 3 was the next one and Jason came fully formed with his mask, right?
Well, kind of, yeah, at least halfway through the film. Like, if people just watched Friday the 13th and then they watched Friday the 13th Part 3, and they just jump straight past this, like, how much that might affect.
So I think, Jerry made the point earlier that a lot of Part 3, they were more concerned with setting up the perfect 3D shot than they necessarily were with creating a movie overall, like a coherent story and characters and whatnot. And I think that there's a pretty big dip in characters between Part 2 and Part 3. Part of the reason I think this movie endures so much and why it's so loved by fans isn't just Jason, although that's a big part of it. I also think that it's Ginny. I think she is equally as important to the success of this movie as Jason is. And I also think that this movie does mimic the look of Part 1 and the feel of Part 1 in a way that it still feels like its own thing, but it does feel recognizable. The setting is similar. They filmed it in just about the same spot, so it still looks like Friday the 13th Part 1. I think when you get to Part 3 and especially Part 5, they don't look as much like Friday the 13th movies to me anymore, at least what I love about the movies as much. And part of that is because they moved the shooting location to California and it doesn't really look like that campsite. So I don't think you would have that same, even though I really enjoy Part 3, I don't think you'd have that same level of success overall, because I just think the characters aren't there and the look isn't there overall.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you're right. I think Part 2 works if you didn't have the stupid flashbacks at the beginning that they're going to become reliant on for the rest of the series. But if you remove those in the edit, then Part 2 works completely on its own. All you need is the story that they're going to have at the campfire. Like, you don't even really need to know who your opening character is necessarily. Yeah. I feel.
No, I agree 100%. Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely on board with that.
So, Al, before we go today, you have a movie coming out, and it will be out by the time this is up. It would have been out for about a week. Tell us about Starfish.
Do I have to?
You don't have to. You absolutely. Jerry, tell us about Starfish.
You won't, I will. You know that. No.
It's my first feature film. It's a very personal story to do with a friend of mine who passed away, and we got to create this crazy, weird, independent movie that has a lot of strange imagery in it about a girl and a mixtape and the end of the world. And yeah, I feel very fortunate that it's getting released this week via 1091 or The Orchard, because they just changed names just to confuse things. And yeah, so it's on digital pretty much everywhere. It's just finished a sort of mini theatrical thing, and I think it's still doing some theatrical stuff up in Canada as well. Okay. But yeah, starfishmixtape.com is where you can go to find out all the information. Sorry,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say that I've made it very clear to our listeners. I love this movie, and I would recommend it to every single one of you. Video on demand, digital, look it up. It's my favorite movie of the year. So go do it.
I have not seen it yet, so I'm not going to blow any smoke up your ass right now, Al, until I actually get to see it. I promise never
to Jerry.
Jerry, what was it about this movie that like really spoke to you? Because you've tooted it ever since like we knew Al was coming on.
This is the deal with this movie. I didn't expect, like, you don't expect these films, you know, as a journalist, you know, you get sent so many movies. And I said this during the Q&A that I did for the film with Al, I think a month ago or something like that. You get sent all these movies, and out of 10 of them, maybe one of them's enjoyable, maybe two, you know, if you're lucky. Starfish caught me off guard because, you know, I was going through some stuff at the time. Like one of my best friends had recently passed away, and I hadn't really addressed it. And the film is so good at allowing its viewer to kind of live vicariously through it. Like it approaches grief and kind of trauma and loss in such unique ways that I hadn't seen before. And it really allowed me to kind of take a step back and really think about things and come to terms with what had happened in my own life through film. And I think that's the most powerful thing about filmmaking. It was a film that, even taking my personal kind of thing out of it, like, it's very enjoyable. I mean, Virginia Gardner's great in the movie. It has such a great soundtrack. Some of the visual stuff is just so great. Like, I couldn't recommend it enough. I totally forgot that Al was on the episode right now. So with me gushing, he's probably just shaking his head right now.
Yeah. I'm very uncomfortable when nice things are said.
Sorry.
Excellent.
Yes, in all honesty, the thing that I try and, like, whenever we did Q&As, the one thing that I want to say when I have an audience to, like, say it to is just, even if you don't watch Starfish, like, please, like, just look at independent films. Like, please try and support independent films and take risks with them. And even if you hate a bunch of them, just keep doing that, because it's normally a very small investment from the audience. And when you do watch it, even if you don't like it, go online and talk about it. You don't have to be really, really mean. You could be critical in a constructive way. But I don't think people appreciate when you go to Rotten Tomatoes and you leave a comment, or you go to Letterboxd, or you do a rating on IMDb, or one on iTunes or something, that legitimately changes everything for an independent film.
Right.
And every single voice does make a big difference with that. So just, please do that.
Great. And Al, where can we hear more of you if we wanted to hear more of you?
Who would want to hear more of me?
You have that wonderful British accent. It's beautiful. My wife is from Cornwall, and I like I said, it's Nurse Jenny. I make her dress up in a nurse's outfit, take my temperature. She tells me she's not in the habit of bringing strange Americans home every night before we go to bed. You guys now all know a little bit too much about me.
I was not going to say anything, so you could just be left to me continuing this. Very quickly, I do want to say one last thing about Friday the 13th Part 2. Which is that everybody should go onto IMDb, find the guy who plays Scott, that handsome man I talked about who walks out from the bushes with his little slingshot. He's by an actor called Russell Todd, and I recommend everybody goes and checks out his pictures on IMDb, because this man, who's now in his, 60s or something, it may be the most incredible photos I've ever seen of an actor on IMDb. They are ridiculous. Absolutely. He is so buff at his age. It's insane.
Doing this right now.
It's insane. I do a show called We Are Geeks, which goes up every Friday, where we tackle a different installment, kind of like what you guys are doing in a franchise. We've got like 15, I think, franchises that we've done so far. We're currently doing the Conjuring universe. And if you go on iTunes, you can find us and
Quickly, when is your new album coming out?
Oh man, you are too lovely. I don't know. It's the honest truth. Like I every day I'm just tempted to we've been sitting on it for about 2 years. My band's called Ghostlight, and we've got an album called Dive Dark. There's a more popular Ghostlight right now, which is not us. We're the older Ghostlight. And yeah, I keep just nearly putting it up on iTunes because I'm just like, fuck it, I'll just put it up. But then we've had a few record companies who are vaguely interested in doing something with it. So if you follow me on social medias, I'm Mr. Al White, then yeah, I will sadly tell people when they can listen to things.
All right.
This dude is ripped.
It's insane, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. He's got the little underwear, the tidy whities peeking out of this picture.
And you look at the posters for the movies he was in after Friday the 13th Part 2, and it's just crazy.
Oh my goodness. This is, where the, oh Jesus. Hey, we never poured one out for my man, Crazy Ralph.
Oh, yeah, I know. Poor guy. Like he's barely in the movie. He's just like spying on them, then he gets the thing around his neck.
Yeah. Miss Crazy Ralph. They tried doing a Crazy Ralph type character in Part 3, and it wasn't the same. I really miss Crazy Ralph.
There was the Graveyardsman guy in the 6th one as well.
Mm-hmm. When we get to Part 6, I will tell you one of my favorite moments in all of them. I love the edit there. To think I'm a giant fart head, and it just cuts to a bunch of kids yelling, "Yeah!" I'm like,
oh yeah, I remember.
Brilliant. Well, listeners, we want to thank everybody for tuning in to our nearly 2-hour discussion on Friday the 13th, Part 2.
As it should be, man. As it should be.
It's really, we could probably go longer, but I promised my daughter we would play Monster of the Week, which is like a easier version of Dungeons and Dragons. I do want to say,
man, after this.
I do want to say, like, the response we've gotten to our first 3 full weeks of being out there in the world has been incredible, and I cannot thank our listeners enough. I can't stress enough. Every retweet, every message you guys send us, every time you like one of our things, every time you share an episode, it means a lot to me that this is actually getting out there in its own way. We're so happy to bring these episodes to everybody, and we want you guys to be a part of it. So please drop us a note at podandthependulum@gmail.com. Tell us about your favorite Friday the 13th memories. Drop us a note at Twitter at podandpendulum. We will be back. Oh, and please, 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 if you can, leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or anywhere you're getting your podcast. Like Al said about movies, it's the same way for us. Like, every time you leave us a review, we get a bunch of new downloads. It does help people find us that may not have otherwise. So we do appreciate everyone that's listened and has, chatted with us online. Like, I look forward to this every single week.
Be ready for next week, definitely, because we have someone from the series being involved for the first time on our show.
We have Larry Zerner, a.k.a. Shelley from Friday the 13th, Part 2. He was kind enough to sit down for an interview for a little bit, and we talked about whether or not Elmo is a power bottom, which I never thought I would ask in an interview, but that's, So if you need to know the answer to that, we'll find out next week. So thank you for listening. Have a fantastic week, and hopefully there is no death curse on anyone listening.